One might have to search through the case files of a Michael Avenatti or someone like that to find a more universally derided lawsuit than this case of Devin Nunes versus Twitter, Devin Nunes's cow, Devin Nunes's mom. My next guest is very well known, has sued some of the most prominent individuals and establishments in our country, including the Democratic National Committee and our president, Donald J. Trump. Of course, I'm speaking about Jared Beck. Jared, how are you?
I'm good. It's nice to be with you here tonight, Jason.
Good to see you,
At least in
Jared.
the virtual sense.
Absolutely. Been a little while, so I'm glad to have you back. This is an interesting matter, of course, that's caught my attention. It's been all over the news. Being reported today that the hoax account, Devin Nunes's cow, now has a greater Twitter following than Devin Nunes himself. Did you hear about that?
No, that's actually, I haven't really been up on my Twitter news ever since I got banned from the platform myself. So
Right.
that's interesting to me. I mean, I guess it's not surprising. I have my own Twitter parody account that somebody unknown to me established called the AI Jared Twitter bot or something, and that has quite a few followers already, even though it's only been around since January. So it
Right.
actually doesn't surprise me that something like that could happen.
But the Jared Beck AI Twitter bot, it's not really, is it mocking you or is it in support of you?
No, I don't know if it's mocking. I wouldn't say it's mocking me. I don't know if supporting is the right word. I think it's more trying to replicate my content as best it can to fill the void left by the fact that I was banned for saying mean things about Kamala Harris. So it seems to have sprung up on its own. I don't know who or what is behind it, but I actually find it pretty funny when I go read it myself. And so anyone out there who may be missing me on Twitter is highly encouraged to check out the Jared Beck AI bot. Yeah,
I should follow it.
Yeah, you should. It's actually a pretty good simulation.
Yeah. Well, and of course, your lovely wife Elizabeth is following the AI bot. But I mean, it's interesting, and I'm glad you raised the point that you've been kicked off of Twitter. I mean, there's no argument coming from me that Twitter is doing things and banning people that they shouldn't be banning. Do you foresee any fictional bovine defendants in your future, Jared?
You mean me suing Twitter for something?
I'm saying, fake accounts and I'm joking, actually. Of course, you have had an action against Twitter. Why don't we start by talking about that a little bit? You had brought a class action suit against Twitter, hadn't you?
No, we've Beck and Lee has never sued Twitter. We sued Yelp in 2008 for refusing to.
We just wanted to say hi.
Oh, there's
Hi,
my
Elizabeth.
wife.
Hi to Jason.
And there's my
Hey,
kid.
guys.
All right, but no, we're having a serious discussion here. So, we sued Yelp for basically shaking down small businesses by putting up. We had evidence that they were putting up bad reviews on business pages back in 2008, and then calling those businesses up and demanding that they enter into advertising contracts as a way of removing bad reviews, which practice that I would say is extortionate on its face. We filed a class action in the Northern District of California, and it was thrown out on a motion to dismiss by the federal district court, which cited the Communications Decency Act, Section 230, which has gotten a lot of attention given the censorship on Twitter and Facebook since the time that we filed Yelp. But essentially, that provision of federal law immunizes social media websites like Facebook, Twitter, Yelp from lawsuits that are brought on the basis of content that is posted there by third parties. So that was a very unfortunate result in that case. I mean, we still get a lot of calls from businesses that are pissed off about Yelp and the way it conducts its business. But I've always been very, very cognizant of the law around the social media websites because of that experience litigating against Yelp. And I know it's a very, very difficult claim to pursue. I mean, we've been asked by multiple people, I think to sue Twitter in a class action, and we actually declined that representation because the law is so slanted in favor of companies like Twitter, which
Right.
we can
And
talk about.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's what I was remembering incorrectly, was that you had put out kind of a questionnaire for people who had been maybe targeted or shadow banned, asking certain questions. And I recall that you had determined that there was a very low likelihood of success. And frankly, there was even a risk for the plaintiffs and the attorneys of being hit with sanctions that could cost money and be damaging to the plaintiffs for bringing such a suit. So
Right.
it raises the question in my mind. Devin Nunes is obviously not just a normal civilian, not a regular citizen hanging around. He's the ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee, and he's a sitting member of Congress. Why do you suppose, Jared, and I know it's difficult to speculate about what motivates other people, but why would somebody like Devin Nunes bring a civil suit that legal experts from Alan Dershowitz to many different individuals have said has virtually no chance of surviving? Why would he bring that kind of suit rather than introducing some sort of legislation to amend or modernize this CDA 230 that's been with us since 1996, really prior to the advent of social media, when it was dealing with bulletin board systems, and even the decision was based on a case where Stratton Oakmont, a pretty corrupt financial institution that was the subject of that Wolf of Wall Street movie, was one of the parties in the litigation. Why wouldn't Devin Nunes want to introduce new legislation to make it a more viable lawsuit before bringing a suit that's virtually guaranteed to fail?
Right. Well, that's a great question. And I just think it's another example of politicians in this country making a lot of noise about problems, but not actually implementing solutions that would actually address those problems. And we see that over and over again on both sides of the aisle, not just Republicans, but Democrats as well. It's pretty clear to me that the only way to fix the problem of censorship, and I'm the last person to defend Twitter's practices. I myself, as we just went over, I mean, I'm banned from Twitter. I can no longer use that platform. I mean, that damages me every day in my ability to get word out about not only my legal practice, but the book I wrote on Bernie Sanders, and just to express my ideas to the public. And I don't think I was banned for anything close to a legitimate reason. So I think Twitter is an awful company. I think it needs to be held accountable for censorship. The problem is that this Communications Decency Act was passed into law in 1996 and signed by Bill Clinton, and it gives wide-ranging immunity to companies like Twitter to do whatever they want in terms of removing content on their website for whatever they think or no reason at all. So the law needs to be changed. And when I see people, whether it's Devin Nunes or anybody else, filing a lawsuit that not only has a difficult chance to prevail to begin with, but the lawsuit itself is pled in a very poor, haphazard way that it almost, it guarantees its failure beyond, the difficult odds that you get to begin with when you sue Twitter. All I can think of is just another example of a politician trying to get publicity to delude the public into thinking he's on their side when he's really not.
Right. Now, I think that what you're saying is accurate. My concerns are, I kind of actually like Devin Nunes. I was pleased to see him stand up for President Trump. And obviously he holds a very important position as the ranking member on the House Intelligence Committee. But as you've just explained, it doesn't seem very intelligent to bang your head against the same wall that multiple other suits have tried and lost. And as you've pointed out, I agree that this lawsuit is written in a manner that's reminiscent of other lawsuits written by Stephen S. Biss and virtually guaranteed to fail. My fear is that Mr. Nunes may have been deceived into bringing this lawsuit because nothing about it makes sense, and it's already serving to damage his reputation. The New York Times is reporting that the parody account has gained 500,000 followers, and I certainly never heard of Devin Nunes' cow before this lawsuit came about. This $250 million amount seems to be identical to the amount that the Covington Catholic school students are suing CNN for. That's a case with quite a bit of merit. A minor, underage, non-adult was basically targeted, ridiculed by major media outlets that totally misreported. Here we've got a comedy parody account making fun of Devin Nunes. I agree there are some problems when actual allegations of crimes are being made, but isn't there a certain understanding on the part of a reasonable person, which I believe is a legal term, that when it's a cow tweeting, that's obviously not a real person making real statements, but a comedy parody account?
Well, let me before I answer that question, let me even back up and say why, and ask this question: why in the world is Devin Nunes suing Twitter for defamation? Okay, if you're able to sue Twitter for defamation, then what you're really saying is that Twitter should censor its content. Okay. Twitter should be going through and making a determination of what's defamatory and removing that content. Isn't that the whole problem to begin with? Is that we don't want Twitter censoring content. We don't want Twitter making judgment calls about what is defamatory and what's not defamatory. So the whole premise of this lawsuit is completely backwards. Okay, I don't get why you would sue Twitter for defamation if your concern is that Twitter is censoring unjustifiably content. If you succeed in getting a defamation judgment against Twitter, then you've just given Twitter a license to censor, even beyond what it already has.
Right. And I want to also add for the audience, you and I didn't have any conversation in preparation for this. I emailed you, asked you if you'd like to comment on the case. I didn't prompt you as to what to say. You're not advising me on any legal matters. We're just having a conversation. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So people are saying that they're suing Twitter for discovery. Somehow the internet and YouTube and social media have been infected with this idea that all you need to do is sue somebody and you're going to get this magical discovery process where you get access to all their information. Talk to us about that a little bit.
No, in federal court, you don't. I mean, when this case is going to end up in federal court, even though he filed in state court, because he alleged the parties are diverse, and he alleged over $250 million, and there's a federal law that's a federal issue that's involved. There's actually multiple grounds for removing this to federal court. But and even in state court, it's true as well. You don't get discovery until you get past the motion to dismiss. In other words, you've got to, most judges these days are going to delay discovery and your entitlement to it until they're convinced that you're actually capable of stating a claim under law, and a claim that's not barred by a statute, such as these claims that have been alleged against Twitter. So it would be highly, highly unlikely unless he can do what I just don't think is going to happen, which is show that he actually has a valid cause of action before he's going to get any discovery against Twitter. And another thing I would tell people about this, and I think you've alluded to this already, Jason, is that you can tell a lot by a lawsuit by looking at the lawyers involved. I mean,
Right.
This is part of legal analysis, and it's one of the first questions that you ask if you get a client and that client says, look, I've been sued by somebody, I want legal representation to figure out a strategy. And the first question you might ask is, well, who's the lawyer involved? Okay, after you figure out who's suing, who the name of the plaintiff suing them. And that's because, not all lawyers are the same. Not all lawyers conduct themselves in the same way. If you look at this guy, he's got a pretty serious record with the Virginia bar. I believe they've sanctioned him 2 times in previous matters. That itself raises some credibility issues right off the bat, because I got to say, I looked at the prospects of suing Twitter up and down because I was asked to by a number of people who've been subject to censorship by Twitter, and I just didn't find a viable case there that I felt confident could get by a motion to dismiss. Right. Now, I'm not saying this guy didn't do research or doesn't know the law, but there's a reason that a lawyer with a bad record with the Virginia bar is the one who said, okay, I'll be the one to file this lawsuit that a lot of people are saying doesn't have a chance in hell.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and this is a matter of public interest because, this banning and censorship on social media is affecting a lot of people. There are multiple different really serious and experienced lawyers, including Larry Klayman, who people have seen on this show, who are exploring ways that they can approach this problem without getting hung up on the CDA 230. As we mentioned, Larry is looking at, collusion and various anti-competitive practices that some of these companies seem to be involved in. So
right.
You've spoken a bit about the disciplinary record of Mr. Biss. We're looking here at a case that took place in about 2006 through 2008 or so, in which a federal judge in the Southern District of New York, William Pauley, reprimanded Biss, and really this was an egregious matter. Biss was representing a client. There was a transaction to happen where $21 million was to be exchanged for millions of shares of stock in a company that was worth nothing near $21 million, in fact, had $5 million in liabilities, and Biss misrepresented facts surrounding an escrow account that he was in charge of. On November 4th, 2002, the parties signed an agreement requiring Brand Aid to issue 23.5 million shares of stock in exchange for Siberian handing over $21 million in a single payment in 30 days. So the lawyer acts as the custodian of an escrow account, and making misrepresentations about that seems pretty egregious, particularly when the amount is $21 million. That's a serious matter, isn't it, Jared?
Very, very serious. I got to believe that Devin Nunes has access to better lawyers than that.
Right, and it remains a mystery why Devin Nunes would select a lawyer like this. I did contact Devin Nunes' office to try to get some more information about the case and try to understand what it is that they're doing, because so many news outlets are questioning this, and as I said, I think it's already backfiring and not helping Devin Nunes in terms of his reputation or certainly his future in politics. I mean, if he's seen to be, making a foolish decision and involved with this lawyer who has been accused by a federal judge in New York of a massive financial fraud, the secondary punitive measure taken against Biss had to do with continuing to practice law while his law license was suspended. So he's misrepresenting facts to clients, he's misrepresenting facts to the Virginia State Bar. Why is this person not disbarred? This seems like really egregious behavior, doesn't it?
Well, you have to look at usually the bar issues an order explaining the sanction and the reason for the sentence it imposes. And usually those are available if you just go, in this case, you'd go to the Virginia Bar website and you'd look him up on there, and usually there's a link to the orders because they want the public to have ready access to any bar orders against an attorney. So I don't know why they decided on that sentence as opposed to a harsher sentence, but it takes a certain type of lawyer to get in trouble with the bar once, but then to get in trouble a second time after you're already you're under suspension. I mean, that's when you really gotta dot your I's and cross your T's because the bar is looking over your shoulder on everything you do. So, it's pretty. I'm pretty sure that any order suspending a lawyer, such as the 1-year suspension here, is going to contain specific language about closing up the law practice during that time period and informing your clients that you no longer practice law. So it's a mystery as to why he thought it would be okay to continue practice at that point.
Right, and the Progress Index here is reporting that the Virginia State Bar imposed the additional added suspension last month. This article's from several years ago, but that was upon finding that Stephen Scott Biss continued to negotiate with an insurance company on behalf of a client in a personal injury matter. So this is like an ambulance chasing kind of a thing. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I mean, how could Devin Nunes, the ranking member in the House Intelligence Committee, be bringing such a ballyhooed lawsuit with a lawyer like this? It seems designed to damage the credibility of Devin Nunes. Now, this lawyer is also representing Robert David Steele in a defamation lawsuit against me that, in my estimation, is of equally dubious credibility. I also found it interesting who some of Stephen Scott Biss's other clients are. Are you familiar, Jared, with David Seaman?
He was on YouTube, if I recall, right? He had a show for a while and was suspended or something like that.
That's right. He was the guy who did a lot of breaking reporting on Pizzagate, and I listened to David Seaman for quite a while. I had actually met him in person at a rally in whatever that park is in front of the White House. This is David Seaman versus YouTube being brought in the Eastern District of Virginia. I was looking at this on Pacer earlier. Let's view the parties and attorneys in this matter. Does indeed look like, Stephen Scott Biss is representing David Seaman. So here he is suing YouTube. I think this is, I haven't read this case yet, but it's interesting because, I stopped communicating with David Seaman after he had Robert David Steele on his show. And Robert David Steele said a number of things about the lawsuit against me that I felt were inaccurate, and I contacted David and asked him if I could have some equal time to discuss that, something I think a reasonable journalist exploring a matter would be eager to do, and he refused to return several emails. So it seemed like he was favoring Robert David Steele in some way at that time. And it's interesting how many lawsuits Robert David Steele and Stephen Biss are involved in that seem to lack credibility. I don't know if you know this, Jared, but recently the brother of George Webb, David Swigert, attempted to intervene in the Robert David Steele, Stephen Biss lawsuit against me in the Eastern District of Virginia, where Queen Tut is named as one of the co-defendants. So Stephen Biss seems fond of suing fictional personalities like Devin Nunes' cow and Queen Tut. What are the implications of that, suing a Twitter handle?
Well, there are procedures depending on what state you're in, for suing or naming unknown defendants, or in this case, maybe he's suing it more as an in rem, as a piece of property. Sometimes you can do that. I don't really, it sounds to me like he's trying to hang defamation claims on these particular accounts in addition to Twitter itself. So he needs to identify a defendant, but he doesn't know the name of the person who actually controls the account. So instead of using like a John Doe 1, John Doe 2, he's decided to name the account itself, like one might name a piece of property in an in rem lawsuit. I don't know if that's necessarily, wrong to do it that way, though. I'd have to look at the pleading and think about it.
Yeah. I mean, but again, there's been, no shortage of coverage on this matter, and it does seem that most legal experts think this has literally no chance. I mean, just today we saw Alan Dershowitz on Fox, and Fox has been trumpeting this case from the day that it came out as, some real big thing. We've seen, interestingly, this network of individuals who have been alleged in a civil lawsuit to be in a conspiracy to defame me. I'm talking, of course, about David Swigert and the other people who have been named in that lawsuit. Many of them seem to be really lauding this lawsuit as a fantastic thing, calling Stephen Biss a hero and all of this. The website Vox described Devin Nunes' lawsuit as bizarre. It doesn't seem to be helping his reputation, does it?
I think what would really help his reputation would be to introduce a bill amending or repealing Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, because that's the source of Twitter's censorship, and his job as a congressman is to introduce legislation, not to file lawsuits. So
yeah, talk about that. What's the deal? How often do sitting Congress people file lawsuits? And yeah.
I mean, it's sometimes there's a good reason for it. I mean, some important decisions have been handed down over the years when Congress perhaps believes that its powers have been, usurped by the executive. So, that would be an example where.
But that's suing the government. That's
exactly.
That's suing the president to do something. It's not suing private entities and fictional cows.
Right, and in this case, this is a nationwide issue that he's up against. He's hardly the first person to come along and be mocked on Twitter, right? I mean, isn't that what Twitter is kind of made for, in a lot of ways? So,
well, hopefully not, but that's what it's used for, certainly.
Well, it's part of free speech, though, is that you're able to mock whoever you want. I mean, so I don't see any. You asked me, wouldn't a reasonable person think this cow is parody? And I don't think I actually gave you an answer to that question, but I'll answer it now. Yes, it's very much parody, and parody is a very important part of free speech. And I've had very mean things said about me on Twitter. Now I can't even defend myself because I'm banned from the platform. But if the government has extended Twitter extraordinary powers and immunities, and I think the government did that in 1996 under Bill Clinton when it passed the Communications Decency Act. At least it laid the groundwork for Twitter to have extraordinary powers and immunities because it wasn't in existence back then. Then it's up to the government to act, or Congress specifically, to act and take those privileges and immunities away. So that's what, in my opinion, that's what the congressman should be focusing on.
Well, and I wanted to bring you back to this because Senator, I think his name is Josh Hawley of Missouri, I believe, has already announced that this is an issue that he wants to tackle. Why would a congressman like Devin Nunes not maybe lock arms with Josh Hawley, who's also a Republican from Missouri? Why wouldn't he get together on this and start to build momentum in Congress for a change to a 20-plus-year-old law that's well behind the technology? This action from Devin Nunes is fraught with conflicts and contradictions that just don't seem to make sense.
Right. Well, I think at the end of the day, I don't know this Hawley guy, but maybe this legislation is the real deal. I mean, it's certainly something that people should be looking at. But I think the people in government, entrenched people in government, are very much in favor of Twitter censorship. I mean, it's part of the way the media propaganda apparatus of this country works now. It's not just the ownership of the media on TV that we're talking about. It's the ability to control the message in social media. And I think if our government loses that, because Twitter, comes under, first of all, can be held liable, for misconduct, and for can be held to a standard that we apply to public forums, because it essentially is a public forum in this country, then that's the moment that our government loses the ability to control and censor the message in social media. So I think you really have to understand that there are very nefarious motives in play that allow Twitter to act above the law with the protection of the federal statute, the CDA.
It's interesting what you're saying, because see, what I'm thinking about is, I think it's fair to say that even though Barack Obama was the first president to ever actually send a tweet, simply by virtue of the fact that Twitter was invented while he was president, I think it's fair to say that Donald Trump is really the first Twitter president. He's using Twitter much in the same way that fireside chats were used by Roosevelt to directly engage the public. And here we see Senator Hawley engaged in what looks like a very close and interested conversation with the president, perhaps about this very matter. So it would seem to me that if Devin Nunes was serious about overcoming this type of censorship of conservatives on Twitter, he would get together with these two individuals who should be his allies. Certainly Hawley is an ally in Congress, and we've heard throughout 2017 and 18 how Nunes has been assisting President Trump in trying to overcome some of the fake news related to the Russia investigation. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to me unless Mr. Nunes is being manipulated by someone with an ulterior motive and he doesn't realize it, or, as we're saying, there's some other purpose here. Now, I mean, speculating about that is not something that I'll ask you to do as a lawyer, but what do you think about this whole situation with the president? I mean, it could have gotten some momentum if he had gone about that way.
The real question here is, why didn't Congress, the Senate, and the president, when they had full control of the government, when he was elected in 2016, why didn't they make this a priority on their agenda? Because they could have passed it at that point. I mean, the Republicans had control of the Congress and the presidency. Now they don't. That alone leads me to believe that there's actually not a political will on the part of either the Republicans or Trump to actually take any action with respect to social media. And I think it's because at the end of the day, the deep state, which is very much in control of this country, remains in control, even though Trump says he's fighting the deep state. The deep state needs to preserve the ability of Twitter to censor in the social media world. I mean, it's really that simple. And I was going to say something else there. I lost my train of thought. But I think the other issue here is, we get a lot of talk from Trump about taking action and this and that. I mean, he could order an antitrust investigation of the social media companies tomorrow. His Justice Department could do that. I mean, that's an executive action that could be taken tomorrow. And I think Larry Klayman's concept of collusion is a very, very viable one when you're talking about social media, because if you look at, for example, when someone like Alex Jones gets banned, it very much seems like a concerted action because, all of the platforms deplatform him at once, and they refuse to deal with him, as a consumer of their services. And refusal to deal is a classic indicia of collusion under antitrust law. And it's a shame we don't have our friend Judge Posner in the room with us tonight, because he's, probably the greatest expert on antitrust law that this country's ever seen. And he's someone that I'm sure we could have a great discussion on the possibility of antitrust theories that could be applied to the social media industry. But I think that would actually be, from a litigation angle, outside the legislation angle, that would probably be the most direct and powerful way of really breaking up these social media monopolies, oligopolies, whatever we want to call them, that dominate this space. And Elizabeth Warren, to her credit, not a fan of her by any means, but Elizabeth Warren has made that part of her campaign rhetoric already. Why isn't it something that Donald Trump has moved on? Why isn't he directing William Barr and the Justice Department to order an antitrust investigation?
It's a good question, but there are other questions I'd rather ask Donald Trump relative to William Barr and bigger crimes that or I should say more serious matters that I'd probably prefer to have Barr preside over, that are equally mysterious, including the crimes of the Clinton Foundation and the types of things that Charles Ortel and I have looked into.
Jason, the DOJ has its own antitrust division. These are special antitrust lawyers, so they can only do antitrust cases. And the antitrust division this used to be a mighty division of our federal government. It broke up the bells, and that was a huge endeavor.
Larry Klayman was part of that team that did that.
I think he practiced in a different climate, and where antitrust was taken very, very seriously. When was the last time the U.S. government, went after an industry, in a serious way? I can't think of it, but this is, it wouldn't take any resources away from an investigation against the Clinton Foundation, because it's a special part of the DOJ that exists specifically for antitrust claims. I think it would be the perfect place to do an investigation of social media.
And they're actually going in the opposite direction, Jared. It was just today, I think, or yesterday, that Disney announced the acquisition of Fox. And they now own Star Wars, they own Marvel characters, they own, the Fox library and all of the entertainment. Just more consolidation in the media and entertainment world. But let me take you back for just a second, because you mentioned Alex Jones, and I'm glad you brought that up, because prior to Alex Jones being deplatformed, there was this really odd situation where Robert David Steele went on to the show on InfoWars and explained to Alex Jones, I believe what he said verbatim was, we believe that NASA has a colony of slave children on Mars. And Robert David Steele's scientific explanation for this was that children were sent so that after a 20-year journey, they would be adults when they arrived at Mars. Now, setting aside the fact that it takes something like 6 or 7 months to travel to Mars, not 20 years, and setting aside the fact that there's certainly no known technology that could sustain humans in space travel for 20 years, it seems pretty flatly absurd to say that there are slave children on Mars. And the media attributed this statement to Alex Jones, and it was bandied about quite aggressively during the process of deplatforming Alex Jones. So my question my wonderment is captivated by the notion of, is this Devin Nunes cow Twitter lawsuit the legal equivalent of an elevator fart? Is Stephen Biss trying to screw up Devin Nunes by bringing this lawsuit? Is there any chance that this lawsuit could damage future suits of this nature, like the one from Larry Klayman, where Laura Loomer and others are represented?
Well, first I want to ask you, I mean, you're a Hollywood guy. What isn't that thing about the children? I mean, I thought that's just the plot of Superman.
It's certainly a ridiculous statement.
I mean,
that
isn't that what happens? He's sent as a child to Earth, and well, I guess he lands there, and he's like a man, like a 20-year-old man.
No, he lands as a baby in the Superman
Oh, he lands
story.
as a baby. Okay, I'm sorry. I for some reason I thought
also
that
fictional, but it's a good point.
I'm misremembering that. All right. Well, okay. And so and now what's the purpose of this program?
Well, do we think that it's possible that the people behind this lawsuit, I mean, you know, Robert David Steele is very closely associated with Stephen Biss. He's touted his excellence as a lawyer. He's representing Robert David Steele in a lawsuit against me. Stephen Biss is also a public figure now that he's been quoted by Fox News. He's appeared on YouTube broadcasts with the luminaries such as DeFango, and he's definitely in the public sphere. Certainly the amount of attention on this lawsuit puts him in the minds and draws questions about what he's doing. I mean, when Robert David Steele goes on television on InfoWars and explains to Alex Jones that NASA has children on Mars, I think he's a public figure opening himself to the possibility of ridicule by making such an idiotic statement.
Right. Well, you know, it seems plausible that, you know, he's one of these. I mean, I think we're all becoming woken up to the fact that propaganda is, you know, omnipresent in our society at every level. And it comes in many, many different forms, and it occurs across every form of media. And so, you know, we focus now, a lot of people, I think, are becoming very attuned to the fact that everything that you would see on a TV show produced by a major network or one of the big three cable channels, you know, is pure propaganda. You know, whether it's propaganda from the left or propaganda from the right, we're not getting, you know, quality, substantive journalism that reports facts about our world. So people are starting to wake up to that. But propaganda exists in other ways as well. And one of those ways is to spread disinformation through lower level channels, let's say, and through, you know, actions that will get reported on, not only at the upper levels, but on the lower levels as well. And these actors themselves, you know, are propagandists, but they're not the type of propagandists who sit behind, you know, a desk and, you know, shout at you from like CNN. They're, you know, they may file lawsuits. I mean, lawsuits are a interesting phenomenon because, you know, most people think of a lawsuit as something that's filed to get a judgment, a legal result. But some people use lawsuits for other purposes beyond what they're intended for, and that's to spread a message or spread misinformation. And why is that? Well, it's because a lawsuit is something that gets, in certain circumstances, automatically reported on in the news. It's because, you know, there's a certain this idea that the filing of a lawsuit in and of itself is a newsworthy event. And because of that, what gets written in the initial complaint gets reported on in the news. So even if the complaint is, you know, a bunch of, you know, rambling gibberish about something, if you file a lawsuit in the right way and you know what you're doing because you're a skilled, let's call them, you know, legal propagandist, maybe that's what this guy is, you can get the desired result, which is not a lawsuit that's going to lead to a good judgment in your client's favor, but it's to get certain elements of the complaint reported in certain outlets. So in this situation, you've got a perfect plaintiff, which has been chosen, a congressman. I mean, if a congressman files a lawsuit, I mean, everybody's got to report that, right? You can't have, it doesn't matter who you are. New York Times, Washington Post, Fox, independent media, Breitbart, what have you. They're all going to report on that, and especially since he's suing Twitter. And so now you've got a surefire way of getting a certain message in the media, which is what a propagandist does. So, yeah, I mean, I think I would just put this in the category of propaganda, legal propaganda.
I also find it interesting, Jared, that the coverage of Devin Nunes' lawsuit, where he got star billing on the Sean Hannity show, it happened on the same day that Fox was bringing on Donna Brazile, Paul Ryan. It seems like Fox was going in a different direction than what its traditional audience of conservative viewers were looking for. And I mean, again, it begs the question, is this not possibly the plot of someone who might intend to put the kibosh on the career of an up-and-coming Republican star who gets a lot of attention? He's young, he's handsome, he's got a Hispanic last name, he's from Portugal, I think, so he's from a family of immigrants. He's been pretty effective. It would be easier to destroy Devin Nunes' credibility and career now than after he becomes a senator or something like that, wouldn't it?
Well, it's, I think I'm not sure destroying credibility is what they're doing. I think they're attaching him to a narrative because, when you attach people to narratives, it makes them very easy to control and manipulate in the eyes of the public. And anybody who's a congressperson in this country, I don't care what political party you're in. I mean, I think you're nothing more than a pawn. So, yeah, I mean, I doubt he had a choice in this matter. I think he was directed to file this lawsuit by people more powerful than him.
Wow.
I think, it has all the hallmark of an organized propaganda operation.
Well, he's certainly being ridiculed. I mean, Washington Post, Fox. I mean, we've had Fox had, Dershowitz said it doesn't have a chance. Obviously, all the usual, liberal outlets are making fun of him, which they would no matter what. But here we've got some more serious coverage. Why Devin Nunes' lawsuit against Twitter is such a bad idea. I don't know. This thing seems to have stink written all over it.
Yeah. I think, you're right about, Fox is probably also, pulling some, it may be a Fox operation for all we know, because, they are, I mean, for crying out loud, they're hiring Donna Brazile. I mean, if there's any hope of, if there was any hope of restoring this country to a viable republic, it would, whatever scenario that is, would have, the right wing holding Donna Brazile's feet to the fire, right? For rigging the Democratic primaries in 2016, which I mean, it's the public record now.
Disgraceful that Fox would hire her.
So now Fox is hiring her, so she's found a home there. So now, what does that tell you about Fox? To me, this is what I see going on, Jason. I'd be interested in your thoughts on this.
Yeah.
I mean, I see a convergence in the mainstream media. I think in the past there were two identifiable poles, the right wing and the left wing, that dominated our cable news ecosystem, and it sort of polarized people into two camps politically. Mm-hmm. I see that gap narrowing, or actually redefining itself, which is, isn't surprising, because I think we're, conducting ourselves, at least politically, more and more like a one-party authoritarian state every day. And so I think what you have are, people who accept the mainstream media, mainstream people, in other words, conformists, and then dissenters, okay? And I would put myself in that category. I think I'd put you in that category. I'd put a lot of people that, I follow and who follow me, and you follow and who follow you. I'd put them in that category.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's where we're headed to as a society and a political system. And so, as you see that division unfolding, you're going to see the mainstream media kind of smushed together ideologically, and there's no longer going to be two identifiable poles, but sort of one shapeless, formless mass of mainstream media that shares one basic narrative, which we're already seeing, which is that Russia did it,
right.
And Trump is bad, and those are the two main components. I mean, there's also narratives that we can't, we probably don't have time to talk about today, going to, massacres and, certain ethnicities and religions and so forth. But all of that is going to be thrown into the mainstream narrative, and there's no longer going to be two poles.
Yeah. Well, I think that's already happened, Jared. I mean, in my view, Fox News has never been what people perceived it as. I've always seen it as a, millionaire-owned, billionaire-sponsored news source that is way more interested in the people that are paying for the ads than the people that are watching the programs. And I mean, that's the reason, or one of the reasons I should say, that I created Crowdsource the Truth, because I wanted this model of independent micro sponsorship, where if someone's watching the show right now and they value the conversation that you and I are having, or the other guests that I have on all the time, and they want me to continue doing this, they'll sponsor the show for their $2 a month, their $5 a month. They'll go to subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth or patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth, and they'll sponsor the show because they recognize that despite what these propagandists who you have identified, I think accurately, despite what they say, this show and I are working honestly towards trying to find the truth, and it's extremely difficult. And I agree with you. I think there is an ulterior motive and an agenda behind these other individuals and news sources. And I think it's very interesting that, these companies can be bought by foreign nationals who aren't American, who don't agree with American ideals or American laws, who want to stifle free speech, and they're, openly lying to the public, involved in a variety of different types of frauds that we have even begun to uncover. And I think it's a real serious problem. I think this Devin Nunes lawsuit is a problem. Do you think that a failure of this lawsuit presents a risk to future lawsuits of this nature?
Absolutely. It's whenever you file a lawsuit without considering your duties as a lawyer, okay? And let me tell you something, Jason. If a client walks into my door and says, I want to file a lawsuit, okay? And, even if that person is willing to pay a huge amount of money to do upfront to do so. Okay, I as a lawyer still have an obligation as a member of the bar to ensure that there is a colorable cause of action based on my investigation of not only the facts that I'm provided with, and which are available to me through my own investigation, but also the applicable law. Okay, and if you don't follow that duty, then what happens is you create the negative effect, which can spread not only beyond you and your client, but to the legal system as a whole, because you run the risk of making bad law. Okay, I think there are ways of bringing Twitter to account legally, and I think we've talked about some of those at length today. specifically, the idea of an antitrust type claim. But you have to think, very critically about your legal theory in light of the applicable case law before you put a complaint on file, because if you don't, then what happens is that the court, in dismissing your complaint, is going to issue an opinion, and that opinion can contain language that forecloses other people from suing Twitter who may have different legal theories and who may even have viable legal theories. So you could actually end up slamming the door in the face of other potential plaintiffs who have, better and more responsible legal counsel by filing, propaganda trash lawsuits like this.
And, I apologize, Jared, but I actually knew that already, so I'm a little bit guilty of leading the witness, but that's my fear, is that this lawsuit was somehow foisted upon Devin Nunes by the same crew that's been trying to sue me for 2 years for what they claim is defamation, what I say is revelations of Robert David Steele engaging in charity fraud. And now what's happened is there's a whole load of other people who have piled onto that lawsuit because somehow they think if people who I've said are involved in a conspiracy and have prevented transcripts of phone calls where some of the individuals in that conspiracy agree to create the conspiracy and then other individuals carry out functions of that, they think that because a lot of them start to enter declarations that proves something. But I think they're wrong, and I think we're going to find out pretty soon who's right and who's wrong. I'm really sorry to see that this lawsuit that Devin Nunes has brought against Twitter is happening. I think it would be much more effective for someone in Congress to be introducing bills that could make, because now, even if he does get behind or introduce a bill, the first thing that people are going to say is that this is a self-serving bill. You want to introduce this so that you can sue Twitter for $250 million, and it has the potential to blow this whole thing out of the water and leave us saddled with the CDA 230 for the next 20 years.
Right. And I guess, look, Jason, the one consolation you might be happy with is that just be happy that you weren't snookered to be a plaintiff in a lawsuit like that, because you could end up being on the hook for attorney's fees if Twitter comes in and files an anti-SLAPP motion against Nunes. And an anti-SLAPP motion, when I was researching these claims, it seemed like Twitter was starting to file those in cases that have been filed against it. So if Twitter pursues that strategy, not only is Nunes going to have to pay his own lawyer his attorney's fees, but he's going to have to pay Twitter's lawyers, and Twitter's lawyers probably charge a lot more than this Biss guy does by the hour.
Well, we know that Stephen Biss is representing Robert David Steele on contingency, so I don't know if he's made a similar offer to Devin Nunes, but you make a valid point.
Well, then they certainly, he's certainly cheaper than Twitter's lawyers if he's working on contingency, because I can assure you Twitter's lawyers are not working on contingency, and they're probably billing like $900 an hour. So,
or more.
Or even more than that. That might be cheap these days.
So obviously now Stephen Biss has once again given his client massive legal exposure to a huge downside of having to pay the lawyers who are defending this frivolous lawsuit. Stephen Biss seems to have a history of bringing frivolous lawsuits, and it doesn't seem like the risk reward in this situation is well calculated. Jared, I want to remind people that they should purchase your book, What Happened to Bernie Sanders, and they can get that at any retailer where books are sold. It's available in a variety of formats. People can download it as a PDF. There's an Audible version of the book, book on tape, however people want to describe that. But this is a great read, and it's Jared's take on what happened. Is there anything else you wanted to let people know about before we wrap it up tonight?
Yeah, I mean, you know, you can get the book for, look at that, $3. It looks like you can get it. I mean, what a great investment.
Where's that? Oh, for the used one?
In the used one, yeah. You could get this used for $3. I mean, think about that. You can get it for a friend who's thinking about making one of those $27 donations to Bernie Sanders. And this book will tell, your friend, why, Bernie Sanders is a fraud. Well, his campaign was a fraud. But, I mean, this is a guy who's running a second campaign for president, all right, after having the primary rigged against him in 2016. And I lay it out, step by step how it happened, okay, based on, evidence that's publicly available, okay? Anybody can find this in public. I think I want to remind viewers that we never actually got to the discovery phase in our lawsuit, which is still on appeal. So this book was written based on all public information, including WikiLeaks. I went through and I outlined step by step how the primaries were rigged against Bernie Sanders. I can't believe, people are willing to reach into their pockets and give more money to this guy to run in 2020, because nothing has changed in the DNC. They're going to rig the primary again, okay, and people still want to donate money. So you can save people, a lot of money perhaps by buying them this book, even if you don't want to read it yourself, and your friends will be very, very thankful.
Absolutely. Jared, it's always a pleasure to have you on the show. I really appreciate your insights. Thanks for joining me tonight, and I look forward
Always
to
a
speaking
pleasure,
with you
Jason.
again soon.
Thanks for having me.
Take care, and thanks for watching, everybody. Have a great night.